Montana is one of my absolute favorite states in the world to hunt. The reason why? Well, it's probably the most game-rich environment of anywhere that I go. Now on this trip, I was headed to the Powder River. Now they have mule deer, whitetails, elk, antelope, but this time I was going after muleys. Now this was my very first trip ever after a mule deer, so I wanted to try it spot and stalk. Probably the most difficult way to get a mule deer, especially with a bow, but I was convinced if I put in the time, well, I knew I was in the right area. Now I was hunting with Powder River Outfitters with Ken Gressland. Ken is a great guy, but when he looked at me and said, "You better get ready to do some stalks because it's going to take at least 10 before you're probably successful." Well, I took that as a little bit of a challenge, and we decided to go out and start looking for muleys. Now this was an early season hunt, so a lot of the bucks are still in bachelor groups. Now this can be a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is, well, when you do find a group of bucks, well, you're gonna have a big variety to pick from. The bad news is, well, when you find those bucks, there's gonna be a lot of eyes looking for you. And really, that's ultimately gonna be one of your biggest troubles, is trying to get in on a big group. You don't know where every buck is, and that's the biggest problem. You may spot 3, 4, 5 bucks, but there may be 1 or 2 eyes you don't see, and those are the ones that always bust you. When you're out looking for muleys, well, usually you're looking in places that are shaded. Muleys like to find the shade. They also like to go to an area where they're high above and can see. Well, this day, nothing like that was around. There were no mule deer in the shade or up high. Probably the reason why, it was super windy. We're talking 40, 50-mile-an-hour winds, and the muleys seemed to have disappeared. Well, getting a little frustrated, we decided to go check out another ranch, and there we saw them. An entire bachelor group of bucks all bedded up against a fence. Now this is probably one of the craziest places you'd ever see a big group of bucks, but that's where they were. The big winds, well, they had pushed them to this area, and apparently they felt hidden. Well, they weren't hidden enough because we spotted them, and it was time to make a game plan. As I was getting closer and closer to these bucks, well, I was feeling it. There were thorns, cactus, everything going into my forearms, but I could see these bucks and I wanted to get a closer look. Now as a bow hunter, I really wanted to be inside 20 yards, and I picked out a white little bush that was where I wanted to be. I figured that'd give me about a 20-yard shot. Now the ground, well, it looked pretty flat all the way up until right before I got to the mule deer. Right there was a small dip that actually went down, and I thought, okay, if I can get to that point, I should be pretty good. As I got down, I couldn't believe it. The mule deer were still there, had no clue I was coming in close, and I only had a few more yards to go. I got back down on my belly, crawled up, and as I looked, these mule deer were all still there. They're just calm as can be, and let's face it, I panicked. I got inside 20 yards, I had planned everything out. The only thing I didn't plan out, how on earth do you get to full draw from your belly? I hadn't accounted for that, and I decided to just try to draw, get to full draw, and stand up. Big mistake. I spooked the entire group. These guys were on their way out of there, and all I could do is watch as these giant racks ran away from me. Now, it's a little depressing to put in all that work, get up close, and realize you busted the entire thing. But that's exactly what happened. And you know what? It was my very first ever mule deer stalk, so not too bad. That was such a perfect stalk. I was so close. And to see those giants run away is almost impossible to believe that that many bucks, 6 bucks, were all here, 15 to 20 yards from me, and I blew it. Now when I scared that big group of bucks up, there was one whopper in there. Now he was a big framey thing, and maybe not everyone would like him, but I loved him. He didn't have a ton of points, but he was an absolute beautiful, big, old buck. When I watched him run away, well, my heart sank. I didn't think I'd ever see him again. When you spook a muley, well, usually they're in the next county, but not this buck. I ended up coming the very next day out to the same area, looking around, thought maybe we'd see these bucks. I saw an old barn there, no big deal. I jumped out to open the gate, and guess what was in there? That giant buck. He was using that barn as shade. Now that's super normal for Western muleys because they're looking for shade. Old barns are the perfect place.
Talk about a kick in the teeth. Blew the stalk, they left, thought they're probably in the next county by now. Drive up not, 500 yards, they're in a barn, an old barn. Who would have figured? I thought for sure they were miles away. Gone, no such luck. We got the big one looking at me through the shed. If we'd had a better door set up, we could have locked them right in there. Well, maybe they didn't spook too bad and we can try it again, but what some luck.
As we scoured the area, we had decided this was an area we were really gonna focus our attention. There was a buck in there that I really wanted, and well, we had been close to him twice, so it wasn't impossible to get in on him. As we were looking around, we spotted what we thought could have been that mule deer or another mule deer in red type bushes. Now it jumped up, spooked out of there, but the good news is he didn't spook far this time. In fact, where he was headed, well, it was his old stomping grounds because that big old barn was just ahead, and the good news is we didn't see him go past there. Instead of just blowing up to the barn like we had before, this time we made a plan. Let's just count on the fact that he's in there. We hadn't seen him go past it, so there was a good chance that him and maybe all his buddies were partying right in the barn.
The first bale's gonna be just too far. You've got to get to that middle one. If I get set up there, it's gonna be like a 30, 40 yard shot. Look at the mass on this. First ever buck, mule deer buck with a bow.
Now I have to give a lot of credit to Ken Gressland of Powder River Outfitters though, because, well, it wasn't exactly the first stock, and like he said in the beginning, it might have been at least the 10th stock by that point in time. But he never gave up on me. Every time we saw another buck, he said, go after him and best of luck. And you know what? Eventually it worked out. This is a perfect example of how persistence paid off, and I got to go home with a beautiful Powder River mule deer.